Hi guys, welcome to this After Effects tutorial where we're going to be creating a ball bouncing animation that should end up looking a little bit like this. Once After Effects is loaded up, we're going to just press on New Project and we are in. So first thing to do to make sure that we are all looking at the same sort of layout, we'll go up to the top, go to Window, Workspaces, and just press on, let's go on to Effect. So we're all on the same one now, so that looks nice and simple and clean. So over here we've got our project panel, just like Premiere Pro, where all your clips will be stored. Down here is your timeline, and up here is your effects and presets. So that's where we can search for things like a blur effect or something, for example. And this big empty window is where our animation is going to be displayed and played back to us. If we go over to the project panel, let's press on this icon down here to create a new composition, sort of like a new sequence within Premiere. So if we press on that, I'm just going to call this composition name Bouncing Ball. Width 1920, height 1080, so we're in full HD, frame rate 25 frames per second, duration, let's make it, 6 seconds long. Hit OK. So here we are, let's get to it. So up here is the shape layer tool. If we hover over it with our mouse and hit Q on the keyboard, we can cycle through all the different After Effects shapes. So let's get to the ellipse tool. Once we're on the ellipse tool, we can click and drag. And whilst we're dragging, if we hold down Shift, it makes sure we've got a perfect circle. So something like that's perfect. And we can see that now as a shape layer 1 in our timeline. So I'm just going to extend this clip so it lasts the entire duration of the composition, and I'm going to rename it by highlighting the layer, hitting enter on the keyboard, and I'm just going to call it ball. To change all the effects like the scale, the position, rotation, opacity on a layer, everything, all of that can be found within the layer options. So this drop down arrow here, if I select that, we can go to these transform options under this arrow here, and we've got all of these properties we can affect. The first thing I want to do is move this thing, which is called the anchor point, to the bottom of the ball. I'll just explain what the anchor point is. If I wanted this ball to spin, at the moment it wouldn't spin around the center of the ball, which is what you'd expect. The ball will spin around wherever this anchor point is. So if I just show you by dragging on the rotation, it's going to orbit that, and that's not what we want, obviously. You would think that I'd want the anchor point in the center of the ball, but for this task we're going to put it at the bottom, and you'll see why in a bit. So if I go up to this pan behind tool, which is next to the shape layer tool, select that, I can then just click and drag on the anchor point, place it the center at the bottom of the ball. That's perfect. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is animate the up and down movement of the ball. We have two properties here under position. This is the x-axis, so backwards and forwards, and this is the y up and down. That's what we want. But to make things a bit easier, we're going to separate these so they're separate things. So if we right-click on the position attribute and press separate dimensions, there we go, I've got x and y. So if I hit the stopwatch on the y position, that's going to record the position of where the ball is at that current moment in time, and you can see that's represented by this keyframe here. So if I move this up by clicking and dragging on the number, that's great. Now before we move this ball down to the ground, let's actually add in a ground. So let's go to Layer, New, Solid. That's fine, that's fine, that's fine. We don't have to worry too much about any of those settings. Let's just change a color to something a bit different to what the ball is. So yeah, whatever. And name, ground, hit OK. So that's filled the screen. So we need to use these transform options that I just showed you for the ball for the ground, because we need to move it down. So if we press this drop down arrow and again transform, position, we know that this one's X left and right, so this one's Y. So if we drag that number, let's move it somewhere like that. So this is our ground, like a child's drawing at the moment, but that's fine. And I'll just extend this, because if I leave it like that, it will disappear after the clip ends. So if I extend that clip, there we go, perfect. Okay, back to our bouncing ball. I'm just going to drag this ground layer below the ball layer, just so we're nice and neat. Okay, I'm going to move forwards 10 frames, maybe 15 frames, and I'm going to move the Y position of the ball so that it sits nicely on the ground like that. So now you can see this line between the two keyframes represents all the frames in between. So if I hit play, we've got that. Lovely. Now on the bounce up, we need the ball, just because of the way energy works, after each bounce the ball is going to lose half the amount of height that it had previously. So if I move forwards the same amount of frames again, drag the Y position up to somewhere around there, that's great. And now because we want it to land in the same place as it did before, instead of trying to get it just right with this, we can just select the last keyframe when it was sat on the ground, copy it, so Command and C or Control C if you're on a PC, and then Command or Control V again, and it will just ping back on the floor where we want it. So if we play that back, we've got a nice bounce. Let's just repeat that process, and each time we move the ball up, it needs to go to half the height that it was on the previous time it was in the air. So it's going to be half as high as that on this next one. So let's go like there, and then paste in that ground keyframe where it was grounded, half the height again. Okay, so once we've got all our keyframes set out, if we hit play, this is what we've got at the moment. So the positioning is right, but the timing obviously is all off. But before we deal with that, let's add in some X motion on the X axis. So if we hit the stopwatch whilst we're back at the beginning on the X position, drag that value so it's over to the left, and now I'm going to go all the way to the end of my composition and drag the X position over to the right. So now we can actually see the motion path of our ball object laid out in front of us. So if we play that back, this is what we have. But obviously the timing is all wrong. So what we'll do is select every single keyframe apart from the first one on the Y position, and holding down Alt, we'll click and drag on this end one. And what that does is it squashes these keyframes closer together. So that's fine, we don't want to do it too much, but then using Shift, deselect that end one now, and hold down Option, click and drag, do it a bit more, hold down Shift to deselect that one, then Option again, click and drag, do it a bit more, and we're just going to repeat that process. So we're kind of exponentially squashing all of these together. So the closer the ball is to finishing the animation, the kind of faster the bounces are, because it's in the air for less height, if that makes sense. So we can visually see that here now if we press play. Because obviously it takes less time for the ball to create an up and down bounce when it's not moving so high. And then we've got a kind of roll here at the end. One more tweak we just need to make to the ball dynamics is adjusting it so that when the ball is in the air, it kind of stays in the air for a bit longer. So if we select every keyframe where the ball is high up in the air, so it'll be all these odd ones, including the first keyframe, we can right click this keyframe and it will do the same for all the other ones. Go down to Keyframe Assistant and press Easy Ease. And you can see how that's changed. It's kind of arced the path of the ball. It's less spiky and more natural. So if we play this back now, the ball kind of hovers around in the air a little bit longer. It looks much more natural. Okay, now we've got the motion path of the ball sorted. The next thing to do is the first principle of animation, which is squash and stretch to give it some life and character. So if we go down to where the ball is here and hit the stopwatch on scale, we're just going to unlink these properties because this is X and Y. We don't want them to scale together. So we'll hit this chain here so they're unlinked. So let's make it so that when the ball is flat on the floor, it's shorter and a bit fatter. And when it's just coming into the floor, let's make it a bit taller, so 130%, and a bit thinner. And I'll copy that keyframe and paste it just after it's left the floor again. So it kind of goes like that. And at the top of each peak, let's reset these to 0, or to 100, sorry, so that the ball is its original round shape. So I'm just going to copy and paste these for all of the other keyframes and make sure they're lined up correctly. And let's make sure at the beginning the ball is its original circular shape as well. So we can watch it come in and it stretches and it squashes, stretches and it squashes like that. But there's something not quite right, and what that is that the ball is not stretching along the path of its motion. So to fix that we need to go under rotation. Let's just hit the stopwatch on rotation when it's at the bottom of the first drop, and then go to where it's at the bottom of each other drop and copy and paste that keyframe, because we just want to make it clear that we want it perfectly at 0 degrees rotation at the bottom of each one. And now just before, if we go to this keyframe before it hits the bottom, we'll just click and drag on the rotation so that it's lined up with its motion path, and the same again on the exit of the bounce. And we'll just repeat that step as well. So now if we play it back, it sort of bounces and pings along, but we need to make sure that it squashes and stretches less and less as it gets towards the end of the animation, because obviously these impacts would be far less than the initial one. So now just go through your keyframes and adjust them so that it looks as natural as possible. So what we've got at the moment is just a very basic bouncing ball, and obviously it's rolling at the end, but the problem is we've got no visual way to tell that it is actually rolling. It needs a pattern or something on it. So you could import a texture of a ball, use Photoshop to cut out an alpha matte or whatever, but for this purpose, just for the speed, I'm just going to create a random shape using the pen tool. So with no layer selected, it's very important, I'm just going to click and make a random kind of zigzaggy crazy pattern like this, but obviously you can do something way cooler. Extend it so it lasts the entire length of the composition, and I'm just going to go to a point where the ball is perfectly round, so I know that's going to be at the top of one of the peaks. Under the transform options of this shape layer, transform position, and I'm just going to use that to center it over the ball. Just going to get rid of the fill on that. So if I press on where it says fill and hit that, that will remove the fill. And I'm just going to make the stroke a bit thinner as well, so it's a bit more detailed. There we go. We now need to move this anchor point of the shape layer so that the anchor point sits within roughly the center of the ball, something like that. Perfect. Now, if we go over to the effects and presets panel and type in set matte and drag and drop this effect over our shape layer, we then go up to take matte from layer, source, and go up to this one and select the ball. It kind of traces around the ball and cuts off all the edges. So it now looks like that is on the ball. We need to now make sure that this moves with the ball, because if we scrub through, the shape layer stays in the same place and the ball goes and does its thing. So to do that, we make sure we're at the point in time where it's perfectly centered on the ball, and we go over to this pick whip icon here and click and drag it to the ball. So now it moves with the ball. The last thing left for us to do is to add some rotation so it's actually rolling. So if we go to the beginning, and this is on our shape layer, and we hit the stopwatch on rotation, and now we go to the end of our animation where the ball stops rolling, let's just increase this like crazy. So we'll add in lots of rotation. So it rolls about 4.5 times, something like that. So if we play that back, we have that. But you'll notice at the end it comes to a very abrupt stop. So to smooth that out, let's right click this keyframe at the end of the rotation, keyframe assistant again, and go to easy ease in. And that means it's going to gradually stop a little bit. We need to do that to the position of the ball as well on the x-axis. So we can see that keyframe down here. Right click it, keyframe assistant, easy ease in. So if we play that back, it comes to a nice gradual smooth stop. If you wanted to add a background to your animation, just go up to the same way we created the ground, layer, new, solid, pick a color, give it a name so we always know what we're working with. I'm just going to type in BG for background, hit OK, and move it to the bottom of the timeline and extend it so it lasts the duration of the composition. And this is what we have. Very cool. To make it a little bit more realistic, we'd normally see motion blur. So to enable motion blur, we just press on this motion blur icon up here, and then again for each layer that moves. So just this tab here for the ball and the shape. And we can see it has some nice natural motion blur now, which makes it feel a lot more realistic. If we wanted to add a shadow to the ball, that's very simple too. We could select both the shape layer, which is the pattern on the ball, and right click those layers and press pre-compose. Sounds complicated, but it's literally the same as merging layers on Photoshop. So if we select that, make sure move all attributes into new composition is selected, name it ball. Hit OK. So now that's all condensed down into this layer at the top. I'm going to duplicate this layer, so Command D or right click duplicate, and then go down to the transform options of the top one, unlink them, and on the Y, so the height, I'm going to scale it down and all the way past 0 into the negative numbers, and just move forward to the point where the ball is on the floor here, and now position it so that it meets the bottom there. Kind of looks like a mirror. To sell this effect a bit more, we could go over to our effects and presets panel up here, type in blur, select, I don't know, Gaussian blur, there's a big choice, select and drag it, and up in our effects controls panel we can increase the blurriness of that. And we could also make it look more like a shadow rather than a reflection if we wanted. So in effects and presets, type in tint, click and drag that on top of the blur effect, map white to black, and then under the opacity settings we can turn that down a bit so it's a little bit more transparent, a bit more subtle. So there we have it. Now it's your turn to try and come up with something new and original. You could have multiple bouncing objects, perhaps different shapes like a square, see how the corners would interact with the ground plane, or even just have different objects bouncing into each other. For example, I could have some text in the middle and I could animate the motion of a ball bouncing into that and knocking it over or something like that. So just be as creative as you can and have fun with it.